Okay, we are now recording, and I want to thank everybody for attending today, or if you're watching this after the fact, we really appreciate you agreeing to volunteer as part of our 2023 property tax protest and exemption workshop. Um, we are partnered with the city of San Antonio, as well as Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid, to go all across the city in every city council district and provide information to help people protest their own property taxes, and then a workshop to actually fill out exemption forms if necessary, get all the documents together and get those submitted right on the spot to make sure people are taking advantage of all the exemptions they might be eligible for. So this is a training specifically for our legal volunteers to help during that workshop part of the session. I'll go through kind of what we are asking of the volunteers, and then kind of the substantive things that you're going to need to know as well. Okay, so first of all, like I mentioned, these are all of the presentation dates that we have set. You can see SALSA is doing 10 different events all across the city. They're generally all on Monday afternoons, and we're asking folks to sign up for individual events through our website, which you can see right there. On the events page, you can click on any of these individual events and volunteer. We're trying to find 8 legal volunteers per session, and so we're doing pretty good on the first ones and still looking for volunteers for later ones at this time. TRLA is also doing several events of their own, and they're recruiting just law students through CLSJ at St. Mary's. There's some opportunities there for some non-Monday afternoon events. They're going to do one on the weekend, a couple on the weekend, and at different times. So we're working closely with them on the content of all of these things, even though the presentations are kind of entirely separate groups of volunteers, different presenters, and so they're kind of independent, but we're working in collaboration. Okay, so at these events, at all of those different places, at libraries and various places around the city, there's going to be quite a few other folks in attendance besides us and our volunteers. First is the city of San Antonio. They are funding this program, and we've been working closely with them for the last couple of months on this. And they will be there with staff from their housing team with all kinds of resources on city programs. BCAD will have a representative at almost all of our events, and they will be able to provide kind of a lot of resources for our volunteers. If you ever get stuck or something, they have the ability to look up in individual properties, exemptions that we can't figure out what's going on with them. They can also take immediate submissions of exemption forms, and we can submit them to them on the spot. And for certain ones, they can actually just go right into the system, fix the exemption without a form even being submitted. We'll talk about that. The tax assessor's office will be there. They're pretty much there for questions about billing, or if people have like past due taxes and things. That's not something this clinic is really focused on, but in case people do come to the clinic, that's somewhere we can refer them. There'll be a table that the tax assessor has where we can, send folks over there potentially to get help with questions on their bills or tax liens or anything like that. We're also, all of these presentations are going to be simultaneously translated into Spanish. So there will also be some translators there. They'll be using kind of a headset situation. Anybody who needs Spanish translator will get a headset, and then, have the translation going on simultaneously to the presentation in their ear. It's not as good as having a full Spanish presentation, but it hopefully will do the trick. We're told also that city council members and their staff might attend the events that are in their districts. There's no confirmation of that we know of, and also that the city has done a press release about this, so it's possible media could be there. Just a quick note on that for any of our volunteers: if you're at the event and if media is there and they're asking to speak with you about the project or the program, it doesn't mean you can't do an interview. We just want to try to see if y'all can let us know beforehand, so we can make sure you'd be prepared to talk about the program if that did come up. Okay, so the program as a whole, what to expect when you get there. These programs are designed to be 2 hours long. The first hour of the program is a informational presentation that covers a lot of different topics, providing kind of broad education about certain things. The slide, you can see the topics we expect to cover. We'll start understanding your tax statement, go through the most common exemptions and explain who's eligible for them. We'll talk about tax deferral applications for folks, who don't want to pay taxes, and if they qualify. And then the rest of the presentation will be really focused on the property tax protest and, how you do that online, who's eligible for it, the steps in that process. We'll talk about types of protests that can happen, how, if you get to an actual hearing, what types of evidence you can submit to BCAD or the appraisals district to try to win your protest, kind of tips and tricks for what usually is effective. We'll talk about the informal part of the protest process and then the formal protest hearing, and then just a bit on, the eligibility for appeals and arbitration if somebody wanted to do that. That should take about an hour, and we're going to try to hold all questions during that time. No questions during the program. In these types of situations that are open to the general public and advertised by the city, any kind of questions we get will very often be just like very specific to individual people. We want to avoid that at all costs, so we're going to try to police that as best as we can and save all those questions for our workshop hour. So following the presentation, that's when our volunteers will get into gear and we will start what we're calling our exemption workshop. This is going to be one-on-one volunteer assistance with individuals. It could be a few different things that we're doing there. Number one, if they did have questions during the presentation, we will have asked them to write those down so they don't forget them, and then, ask those questions of a volunteer one-on-one after the fact. So it could be questions about anything that happened during the presentation. Then we'll also be working with folks to actually fill out exemption forms if they may be eligible for homestead, veterans, all of those types of things. And then, once those forms are completed and if they have all the right materials that they need to submit them, we'll submit them on the spot. If they don't, we'll, give them those folks more instructions on, what documents they need to collect before they can submit their exemption applications or other documents. And so maybe I covered some of this slide a little bit already, but kind of what to expect, when you get there. So first of all, there's going to be a presentation hour before volunteers actually step into their responsibilities. So when you arrive, we should have a seating area designated for legal volunteers. Look for that. We'll either have a SALSA sign or a legal volunteer sign with seating that's kind of like away from the presentation to allow the community to have all the seats that are available close to the presentation. After the presentation happens, staff will do kind of announcements explaining to everybody what is going to happen, what the workshop is, and what we can help with, what, various instructions, and hopefully kind of reduce the chaos a little bit. So every client, when they check in, is going to get a packet of documents. It's going to include a couple of like frequently asked questions type pages, and then it's going to include several of the most common forms that people might need. So for all the most common forms, they're going to have a packet that already has that stuff in front of them. As we go into the workshop part, they should hopefully be able to pull out forms that they might need, leave the rest that we'll pick up later, and get to work on those if they actually need them. And the idea is that all the clients will stay seated for this workshop, and our volunteers will roam around to people with their hands raised for assistance to help them fill out the forms, put together exactly what documents they need. If they need, so we'll get into this, but if they need a copy of a particular document to submit with their application, we'll have copy machines. Our volunteers, will try to facilitate that, get copies of all that stuff made for them. and then help with basically anything else along the way. So we may have clients that are there saying, well, I don't know if I have these exemptions or not, so we're going to want to look up their properties for them on BCAD, like one-on-one with them. So you can do this on your cell phone or your laptop. So please bring one of those options to be able to look up properties for folks. And then, we're going to go through the rest of the process all the way to getting them submitted, hopefully. We can't fully control what everything is going to be like, and all the venues are going to be different. So there may be some amount of chaos with people looking for answers from different organizations or whatever. But we're going to just roll with that and do the best we can to make sure everybody gets all the assistance they need. Okay, so now into kind of the more substantive part of what you need to know. First, to answer questions from individuals before they even know if they need to request an exemption of a certain kind, they would need to know if they already have it, and this is the way to find that out. So, how to search a property with BCAD's website. Step one, you go to bcad.org. This is that they have a pretty decent ability for mobile access to this. You click on property search. Then essentially you just put in the address or the name of the owner, and options will pop up, usually as like pretty close matches. Their system actually does a very good job of finding addresses with very limited information. Right now, the 2023 assessments have not gone out. So whenever you find this property, it may not have any of the information about assessed value, which exemptions are applicable for this year, whatever. At the top, however, of this form that you can see the screenshot of, there's an option to select which year. And so if especially for our early clinics that are coming in February and March, assessments may not have come out yet. In that case, you'd have to click down on 2022 to find the information we're looking for here. And that information we're primarily going to be interested in is what's in the red box on the screenshot, where it tells you the exemptions that are applicable to this property. So the example in the screenshot, that's my house. And you can see I have a homestead exemption. That's the only one. Now, in that same space, though, you may see other codes depending on what their circumstances are. There's a list on this slide that really kind of goes through what all of those are: disabled veteran, in various ways, disability, total exemption. Those are going to be the common ones. There's potential for others as well, but these are going to be the common ones, and these are going to be the ones we would, if they're not present, that we would want to put applications in for. Okay, the first one of those that's the most important and the most common is the homestead exemption, the regular plain Jane homestead exemption. And to be eligible for this, all you have to do is own the property and live in it. And so almost everybody who's a homeowner that lives in their home is eligible for this exemption, and it's significant. It's in the tens of thousands of dollars for different to reduce the the taxable value of your property. And this is what that exemption application looks like. This will be in the packet that folks receive, so they'll have a paper copy of this, and so they may fill it out on their own prior to needing any help. The form itself is really pretty self-explanatory. It asks for information about the individual. It asks for information about the property, and then you check the box that I have highlighted in red there: general residence homestead exemption. It's super easy. The one difficult part that may come up, and it's not difficult, but that may cause problems, is that you have to also provide a copy of your Texas driver's license or Texas ID, and the address needs to match the property address. So like I said, we'll have copy machines for folks to copy their driver's license so they can get these submitted. But if anybody comes in and they don't have a Texas driver's license, there are a couple of exceptions that apply specifically to people who are like active military. If there's not one of those exceptions, we have to advise them that before they get the homestead exemption, they need to go get a Texas driver's license and update their address. That's going to be all we can do for those folks, because it's mandatory that is provided along with this if they don't meet a certain exception listed on the form. So it's pretty easy. It's two pages long. It requires a signature, but that's it. It doesn't have to be notarized or anything. Very, very easy. The next one that is super common is the 65 and over homestead exemption. It's actually on the exact same form. You just check an additional box. So this exemption varies from taxing district to taxing district, but it's always at least $10,000 for school districts. That's just in the state statute. It could be more than that, and it could also apply discounts depending on what city and school district you're in as well. And so, like I said, it's combined with regular form. So all you have to do is check both boxes. If somebody's over 65, has never gotten a homestead exemption, or it's a new house that they've never done this with, you just check both boxes and that'll do it. If they already had a regular homestead exemption though, and they came here because they're like, oh, I just turned 65 this year, or I'm gonna turn 65 later this year, then as long as their information is up to date with BCAD, BCAD will automatically apply this additional exemption for them, which is great. Now, if we can't determine if that's been done correctly or not, then we can check with BCAD and provide updated information using their driver's license, and then that should be automatic. BCAD has told us that these events, which they're going to be at most of them, but not all of them, if they're there, these folks in this situation, don't even have to fill out a form at all. They just need to bring their driver's license up there, and they'll update the person's birth date in their system, just electronically without a form needing to be submitted at all. Now, if we don't know if either BCAD is not there and we don't know what's going on, or if they didn't provide birth date information for some reason, I don't know how that would be possible, but then we can still just submit the form and check both boxes, and it'll get updated with BCAD. The next common one is the disability exemption. It's also on the exact same form. It works like very similar to the 65 and over exemption. It just it kind of stacks on top of the regular homestead exemption to provide additional dollar exemption over what everyone else gets. And so similar to 65, you would just check both boxes, the general exemption and the disability exemption. Now, there is kind of a little quirk that you can check all three of these boxes, general, disability, and over 65, but you can only apply either the disability exemption or the 65 and over exemption to any individual taxing entity. So you don't get to double dip on over 65 and disability. If you have one or the other, you check both boxes. If you have all three, you can certainly check all three, but in terms of the exemption you actually get is going to, it's not going to stack all three on top of each other. Now, surviving spouses for both over 65 and disability are eligible for these exemptions. For over 65, they just have to be at least 55, and their spouse who passed away, had to have been eligible for it before passing away. The same applies for disability. If a person had a disability and that exemption had previously been on the property, a surviving spouse is eligible to also claim that, even if their spouse has passed away. Now, for disability, though, there is additional requirement to provide evidence of disability. So unlike 65, where you just need your driver's license, disability, you do need a copy of your disability determination letter from Social Security. So for individuals at our clinic, this may be something that they have and we can submit. It may be something that they can easily pull up on on a laptop or something, in which case we can try to print it for them if it's easy for them. If they don't know where it is or they don't know what it is, we basically would need to provide instructions to them that you can submit the general homestead exemption or the over 65 exemption right now. To add the disability exemption, you need to submit this form again with a copy of that letter once you find it, and kind of give them instructions on that. It's pretty simple, except for just needing a little bit of documentation here and there. Now I want to kind of turn over to Todd on our veterans team to talk about the two different kinds of veteran exemptions. Todd?
Thanks, Ryan. Hi, everyone. So Todd Tagone, like Ryan said, I work the veteran side of the house. So there's two property tax exemptions that are going to apply to our veterans. The first will be the 100% disabled veterans. The way we're going to figure this out is the veteran would have to submit their VA, their Veterans Affairs Benefits Summary Letter and Service Verification Letter, along with their application, much like the Social Security. You're looking for one of three conditions. They don't all have to be present. Only one does for them to qualify for the 100%. The first is that they're actually rated at 100%. You'll see that under the VA benefit information. The next one would be if they're considered to be totally and permanently disabled, because you can be less than 100%, but still be considered to be totally and permanent by the VA. So again, it can be one or the other. And then finally, the third category is if you've been, if you're being paid at 100% disability because the VA has determined you're unemployable. And that's, again, in the VA benefits information of their letter. This letter is easy to pull up. You can get it on the VA app or through the VA website. So depending on where we are, we can probably direct the clients over to wherever to get it. Now, the second type, for that, you're just going to use that resident exception application form. The second type has its own form, which we'll have on file there if you need it. And that's for any disabled veterans that are receiving disability from the VA, but less than 100%, not considered totally and permanently disabled, and still employable. Go to the next slide, please. So for that, again, you'll look where on the previous slide it said 100%, it'll give you a percentage rating. Here are the rates that are currently in the Texas code that'll apply. There are three situations where they can get the full $12,000 off, and that's if they're blind in one or both eyes or has lost the use of one or more limbs. But if you come across that, it's more than likely that the VA has also determined them unemployable or 100% totally and permanently disabled. So it's just one thing to look at. With these exceptions, veterans exceptions can be aggregated with all other exceptions except for the other disabled one. And the only caveat is that it has to be applied to one property. So if you're going to use the over 65 and then you also have a 50%, you can use those together as long as they're on the same property. And then they have 5 years. Let's say that the VA took too long, took 4 years, which is pretty feasible. Took 4 years to give them a rating of 100%. They can go back that 4 years and have it applied. And I'll kick it back over to you, Ryan.
Awesome. Thanks, Todd. And so, you know, I think these veteran exemptions are a little intimidating. They're, you know, but I don't get bogged down in like all of these numbers, like the different percentages and stuff. If we're talking to individuals, you know, you're volunteering, someone says, you know, I'm looking about these exemptions and I'm a veteran and I'm disabled, then we can kind of like dig into these. And Todd will be available at our events, at least the vast majority of them, or someone from our veterans team certainly will be at our SALSA table, where you can kind of run this stuff by Todd, make sure, you know, we've got the right form depending on the level of disability, and, you know, we're doing all of this the correct way. It's not, you know, the actual exemption that people get, whether it's 5,000 or 12,000. I mean, we never really have to worry about that. We just get the application in, and BCAD kind of makes that determination on, you know, based on the application. So don't feel too intimidated by it. We'll get it figured out, and there's just this just knowing that there's different kinds of different levels of disability exemptions is the important part. Okay, so the next most important document for these clinics is what's called the AIR affidavit. And I don't even know how to spell AIR. Did I spell that right? But anyway, um, the the purpose of these is for basically when the owner of a house passes away, and then maybe like their son or their grandson, now lives in that house, and is maybe the only heir, or there might be other heirs as well, but they've never gone and changed the property records. So those folks who live in those houses and they have an ownership interest, even if they're not the record owner, they can still claim homestead exemptions and all of the other exemptions we've talked about. Now, to do that though, because their name is not on the property on the deed in the deed records with BCAD, they also have to submit one of these affidavits. Now, the screenshot of the form you see on the right, it's actually a couple page long form with these small short affidavits for each specific situation. So you can see the first one here says affidavit for applicant who is age 65 or older and ownership interest not of record. So that's for the 65 and over exemption. Now, if you go down, it'll list all of the different exemptions that we've talked about, and provide this statement, regarding heirship, and that, have an ownership interest in the property. Now, these affidavits do need to be notarized, okay? This is, the regular exemption forms that we talked about earlier, they just need to be signed and sworn to by the person, who's submitting them. These need to be notarized. At the event, if you're talking to someone and going through this and realize they have this problem, number one, we need to explain this to them, that they are still eligible, that they just have to fill out this extra form and basically swear that they have an ownership interest in the property and that they live there, and that the person who does own it is deceased. And, then once we do all that, they fill this out, then we will have folks at our SALSA table who are notaries, who will notarize these on the spot so they can still be submitted. This is the only time we're really wanting clients to get up, okay? We want them to stay in their seats and be helped by volunteers as you can. But because we don't know the demand for this particular thing, we need to have clients line up with the notaries who have to check IDs and, do all the things that notaries normally do. And so this is the one time we're going to ask you to, once all the materials are together and they're ready to go, say, okay, now just go over there and wait in line, or go see the notary over there, and they will, notarize this for you right there on the spot. Now, in addition to requiring a notary, these also require a couple of extra documents that folks are maybe unlikely to have with them at this event, if they didn't know that this form exists. One of those is the death certificate of the record owner, okay? And so I think it's going to be very common that we have to explain this form to people, get them to sign it with the notary, but then they'll take it home with them and put together these few additional documents and then mail it back to BCAD, sorry. They need to find the death certificate for the record owner. They need to have a current utility bill for the property. And now, according to BCAD, there's no requirement that like any particular person's name needs to be on that utility bill. But I think it's going to be very weird if a dead person is, still has a utility bill in their name. So I'm not sure about that, but according to BCAD, no particular person has to be on that utility bill. They just want the current one to kind of confirm that you're living there. And then if there are any court documents related to the property, like a probate has been opened with an affidavit of heirship, or there's a will, or anything like that, there certainly may not be, and that's usually the reason why the ownership, the name on the deed hasn't changed. But if there is, then that also should be submitted along with the same, with this affidavit as well. Basically, just trying to prove to the district that you're eligible for a homestead exemption because you have an ownership interest in it and you live there. All right. Now, there are some other less common exemptions that I don't think, we're likely to encounter. If you do, we will have forms for these, and we'll try to figure out, we'll work with whoever's volunteering on these particular ones to make sure they've got the right forms. These are not going to be passed out in advance. They're not that common. And so, but we'll be prepared with some explanation or materials about them, if it does come up. So one is one of the ones that Todd just was talking about for veterans disability between 10 and 90%. My understanding is that these are just not that common. And so we will certainly have forms with that, and Todd will be able to help with that. The others are even less common, for within city limits. Agriculture and wildlife exemptions. I guess it's possible in rural Bear County, perhaps. If a person's property is, they're trying to do a historic restoration, or the property is a historic landmark, there may be opportunities for that. And then if they're coming there on, potentially on behalf of like their, small nonprofit that they have that's technically the owner of a property, or, a small church that they run out of, like, the part of their property or something like that. Those organizations are generally, have exemptions as well, and so we'll have at least some materials for them to read about on that and take home with them. But I doubt we'll see that, but we just in case. The last thing that we are planning to help with as well, and will be part of the original presentation and in people's packet of information that they get, is a copy of the property tax deferral application. Now, this is an application for people who are over 65 or they have a disability. So it could be any age if they have, a disability that, can be proven the same way with the Social Security Administration, a determination. If someone applies for this and it's granted, they never have to pay taxes on their property again, during their lifetime if they never move or anything like that. It's but it's we need to be very clear that this is a deferral. It is not an exemption. Okay. So all those taxes that are not being paid, they accumulate year after year after year after year, and the tax assessor will put a tax lien on that property for all of that. In addition to just the regular fees, the regular taxes, there's also, like, I think it's 5% interest charged on that amount annually. And so this, you can imagine this can get completely out of hand. For some people, this is their best option, especially if they don't have heirs, they don't, they're disabled, they don't have the ability to pay the taxes. Um, you know, this may be their best option because they're basically thinking to themselves, well, when I die, I'll just let the tax district have the house or whatever. They may be thinking that, or they may be thinking they just want to do this in the short term, and catch up later. I mean, they have that option, but um, you know, for folks who can't afford it, this may be their only option to avoid, like a tax foreclosure. So we're going to provide information about it and help fill out the application. The applications are fairly straightforward. Like the only requirement is proving, again, age 65 or a disability, and all the correct information that's listed on the form itself. Um, but we also just have to be clear and advise people that if you do this and you were expecting to leave this house to your child, they will get that house subject to a giant tax bill. And if they don't pay that tax bill, it'll be foreclosed on. And, if you're planning to sell this house in a few years or something like that, you also won't be able to sell it because it'll have a giant tax lien on it. And so you'd have to pay that before you could sell it. And some people may have ideas about what to do about that, pay those taxes out of the proceeds of selling it or something along those lines. We just need to be clear with people that, this is not an exemption. You're just delaying this for later. But we'll still help with the application if people need it. Okay, and so the last thing I wanted to just mention, a lot of our presentation in the first hour is about property tax protests. The workshop is intended really just to maximize exemptions. Now, but because of the way this has been advertised and the presentation itself, I'm quite certain that all of our volunteers will get a lot of questions about property tax protests. So if you get a question about that and you're not sure what to do about it, my general advice is let the client know that you need to confer with your colleagues and either talk to one of our mentors who will be there, talk to a SALSA staff member. We can find out an answer one way or another. If people are just confused about the simple process for filing it, what kinds of evidence they can submit, hopefully we'll be able to answer those questions pretty easily. If they have long individual questions about their individual situation, our hope is to listen to those and try to provide the best guidance that we can. But we are not going to be helping people fill out property tax protest forms or gathering evidence, and certainly not filing any property tax protest for them. This may be especially prominent in later clinics that we have after the new assessments come out. So, for February and March, maybe less of this. Once assessments come out, either late March or early April, I think a lot of people are going to be trying to figure out how to do this. So we may get questions. We will try to, just do whatever we can to serve the community on these issues, but make it clear that, we're not representing anybody in these property tax protests where, the presentation is really about how to do this yourself. So, that's that. I wanted to, give an opportunity if anybody did have any questions, we can briefly answer those. So if any questions come up during during the events itself or anything like that, of course, we will be there to help with that. Any questions come up prior to that, you can email our team. That's myself, Ryan Cox, Miranda McCardle on our team, and Todd Tagami. Any of us, email us. We can figure out answers to whatever questions you might have. And we look forward to seeing everybody and appreciate everybody's help volunteering with this project.
Thanks, Ryan.